Hello and welcome to Hammer and Dice. Today I'll be looking at Monty Haul, a 5th edition zine with a 1st edition vibe, written by Mark Finn with artwork by Mike Messer, Odom Ko and Michael Washburn. I want to open this up by saying a big thanks to Mark Finn, who's very kindly sent me this issue of the zine Monty Haul along with the 2nd issue as well, so I will be covering that in the future. I just wanted to make that clear that I'd received this zine for free, but I do aim to give it a fair and honest review. So again, thank you to Mark for sending them to me. It's really very kind. It's much appreciated. So diving right in, some general notes to begin with. So this zine's tagline is about bringing a 1st edition flavour to 5th edition games, with this particular issue focusing on users of the Arcane, warlocks, wizards and sorcerers, with all the articles somehow tied back to magic, the use thereof, or extra details that you can give your characters to give them a more esoteric flavour. The printing and the quality of the paper is really nice. The cover in particular has this really nice matte, kind of almost rubbery feeling effect to it. As you can see, my lights aren't shining nearly as much as it does with other zines, so that's much appreciated. Overall, the art quality throughout the zine is really good, and the characters that appear on the front cover reappear throughout the zine, which is a nice detail which you might miss. Apart from the articles in it, which we're about to cover, the one thing I do want to bring up about the zine is that there's commentary throughout it. At the beginning here, there's this introduction. All the articles have this almost conversational tone from them, and as you go through, these notes explain a lot of the decisions that Mark made when writing it, and how he intends the content to be used, or how he suggests it to be used in your games, and why he's made certain decisions. I think this is really good, as it means you get extra context for the thing that you're reading and can interpret the design choices appropriately. And if you wanted to change anything about the zine to fit in with your own game, you can make the changes alongside the commentary that's there, so that it hopefully fits in with the theme that's given in the zine. For example, in the section of additional subclasses, the one for the Wizard Arcane tradition, particular, Mark talks about how he sees the wizard class as a surviving holdover from the early days of Dungeons & Dragons, and then discusses how the subclass in the zine, things man was not meant to know, would fit in with Party of Adventurers. So we'll begin at the beginning, as you usually do. There's an introduction here from Mark, which is just kind of giving the details on the different articles of the zine and some of his thinking behind it. So then the first article proper here is Design Notes for a Magical City. This is both a city that you can drop into your campaign world, as well as discussion into the practicalities of a magical city, and it's a grab bag of flavour content that you can add to your existing cities that might have a high concentration of wizards in a Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition game. This can be used with any setting that has a kind of magical academy or wizard school, a city built in a place of magical importance, such as convergence of ley lines, or a place where the barrier between planes is thin, or maybe even a city that's home to 2 rival wizards and the series of disciples and pupils. So for example here, the first bit it talks about is the magical economy, which discusses how a high number of wizards in one place would drive up the prices of reagents, and that would make even basic spell casting have an associated cost, and then gives a solution that some wizards come up with, is that they send adventurers out on missions to gather reagents just for them. And I think this would be a great kind of premise for anything from a single play session to a whole campaign. It goes into quite a lot of detail about lots of different things, but my favourite in particular is the Graveyard Prison Library. This is a library staffed by necromancers and intelligent undead spellcasters who are serving time for their crimes and are being put to work staffing the magical library. You can call upon their services and thousands of years of knowledge for the price of a few drops of blood. What knowledge is worth that price and what they will put those drops of blood to use for is up to the players and DM. I think this is a great take on a magical library, and it's a fun way to use necromancy in a setting where they aren't directly up to dastardly deeds. You can just imagine skeletons silently walking the aisles, reshelving books, and accidentally scaring newcomers to the library who aren't paying close attention to their surroundings and just turn and are suddenly facing a skeleton. The next article here is He Doesn't Look Happy to See You, reaction rolls for 5e. So the rules in this article would be used to generate reaction rolls for intelligent or humanoid characters that your players would encounter, maybe in a city or an urban environment, not necessarily out in the wilds, or used for monsters or unintelligent foes. I think this article is well needed in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, as the game sits in this weird place where a lot of the material produced for it is very much combat based material. Go here, kill this, here's your new abilities that allow you to kill things better or control the battlefield better or impose your will onto the people you're talking to, whether that's charm spells or fireballs or a sword to the face. But it also is played very heavily, this kind of storytelling side to it. So having every situation that the players come across an encounter descend into combat is definitely not realistic, and having some extra rules to add some randomness into how these encounters are started is definitely much appreciated. Then this is good for any group's playstyle, so the table showing the disposition here is useful enough on its own for groups that like to full role play these interactions, so the DM can roll to see what the starting disposition is, and then the group can just role play their way through the interaction. For groups that like a bit of both, a bit of crunch and a bit of role playing, you can start here, role play the interactions, generate modifiers to these DCs based on those interactions, and then role play through it that way, but having some tying back to the checks. Or for groups that just like rolling dice and having their character do the talking if they're not particularly confident in that, or if they don't like doing that kind of play, then you can just use these rules as is and just rely on the dice rolls. So overall, a good and flexible system I think is definitely needed in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. We then have the new Arcane archetype options. So this is the King in Yellow Warlock Patron, the Eldritch Ancestry for Sorcerers, and the Things Man Was Not Meant to Know, a Wizard School. So my opinion on subclasses generally in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition is that it doesn't matter if they're a bit overpowered or a bit underpowered, as long as everyone at the table is having fun. I think the internet makes a big deal over things being overpowered or so on, but as I said, if everyone's having fun, then it doesn't matter too much, as long as everyone's had the same opportunity to pick from all the same options. So the King in Yellow is a take on a more down-to-earth, I'm not sure if that's the right phrase, great old one patron. So Cthulhu in all his might not be paying too much attention to the dealings of petty mortals going on around him, but the King in Yellow, the Yellow King, definitely shows more of an interest in the comings and goings of humans, or at least the people that worship him are. So the additional spell list and patron features are all very thematic, pushing the idea of visions of Carcosa, driving people to madness, and the otherworldly courtly balls and performances and intrigue, which are all barely masking an underlying kind of insanity. All the patron features seem pretty well balanced. The level 10 one, though, I'd say is notably quite powerful, as it allows you to repeatedly, as an action, impose disadvantage on your enemy's attacks and gives you advantage to attack them. And this can target up to 5 creatures, and they don't save against it, and they have to use an action in their turn to remove it. So it's even just using it one every turn to target 5 creatures is absolutely turning the action economy in your group's favour. So having either a limited number of uses or requiring a save when it is used, I think would be a very good way to improve that. But otherwise, it's all pretty good stuff. The Sorceress Origin Eldritch Ancestry is an ancestry where you are descended from something otherworldly, and your physical form is kind of straining to contain the power from your Eldritch birthright. This Sorceress Origin is a bit odd because it's a melee focused subclass that allows you to alter your physical form to one closer to your ancestors, and then use that new kind of power to wreak havoc on those that oppose you. So within the subclass, you can choose one of 3 themes for your ancestor, all of which are left slightly vague, so the player and DM can skin them to whatever they want, and each of them themes the subclass slightly differently, so the Black Goat, the Void Dweller, and the Deep Ones. I think it's a pretty unique direction to take the Sorcerer, as it paints a picture of someone who's not entirely in control of their body, and you can imagine the character's origin story being something akin to the main character from Shadow Out of Innsmouth, the character from the anime Parasite, or a less homicidal version of The Thing. It feels quite powerful, with the ability to deal the kind of horrendous amounts of physical damage in a single turn, and lots of additional features to back that up. But as it builds off the base Sorcerer class, without multiclassing, it gets a bit multiple attribute dependent, needing a high charisma score for sorcerer spellcasting, and getting the most out of the class's transformation ability, needing high strength to make your melee attacks hit more reliably, as you would only get 1 per turn, and then you need con to help my HP to survive being hit, and you need a reasonable dex modifier to survive once you're transformed, as you don't have any armor proficiencies, but that's even a little counterintuitive, as you need a lower dex to be able to get hit so that you're able to transform. So it needs quite a lot of stats to make it work, and I think with multi-classing, maybe into Barbarian, you could get something that'd be very, very strong and might need to be looked at, but on its own, I think you need to see on the table to see if it's overpowered or underpowered. But it is very nicely flavoured, really good theme, and I'd love to see someone play this. And then finally we have the Wizard School Things Man Was Not Meant to Know. So this is a wizarding subclass in the style of a scholar skirting the edges of forbidden knowledge, so someone who hasn't taken the full plunge of receiving power directly from a great old one like a warlock would, but is still reading the works of those who have. It could be played as either someone who seeks knowledge for personal gain, or as someone who's trying to protect the world from these outer beings and is suffering the consequences themselves. So think of a Call of Cthulhu investigator who's several steps down that path towards madness, but isn't quite there yet. So I think as an alternative for the Warlock, portraying someone who has got their powers through study and through glimpses of the Eldritch, it certainly succeeds. And the Eldritch Augury ability, which is the level 6 class feature, is really good at conjuring up kind of the image of someone who knows a bit too much for their own good, and its potential for you to push the ability and then suffer madness as a consequence of that, I think is a really good theme that you don't find in too many Dungeons & Dragons classes. It fits with the theme of the other subclasses, feels pretty strong on its own, but when it's on the gaming table, I'm sure it'd be fine, as everyone else is doing crazy amounts of damage and doing lots of different weird and wacky abilities. The next article we have is New Arcana Backgrounds. This consists of two backgrounds, the apt pupil and the inept student. Both of these represent someone whose background before their adventurer was as a study of magic. Not a scholar in the fact that they're fully trained, but someone who is still in the process of studying and learning. The apt pupil, somebody who can ingratiate themselves well with magicians and arcane magic users, but it may be a bit too big for their boots, and gets a negative interacting with those who don't like magicians or magic users, such as they have personality traits like I am an arcane snob who looks down on those who cannot appreciate magic, or I employ a polysyllabic vocabulary to convey the impression of tremendous erudition. And then the inept student, similar again, somebody who studies magic but this time isn't very good at it, so it's kind of the other side of the coin, in that they're very good at ingratiating themselves with those who don't like magic, but their ineptitude and incompetence means that people who are skilled in the ways of magic can easily see that they are not, and so they get negatives to interacting with them. These two backgrounds, while pretty specific, are unique and would really work well in a game set in a highly magical society. And then we have quite a large section here called I Drank What? Alchemy and Herbalism Ironed Out Part 1, and then associated with it is a second article, The Well-Stocked Shop Part 1, Elixirs and Drafts. So these two articles go hand in hand, with Alchemy and Herbalism Ironed Out giving a system that can add on onto your game to allow players to rank up through 3 levels of Alchemist/Herbalist, which in here is referred to as Apothecary, but I'm going to refer to it as a Herbalist because that's you'd use a Herbalism kit when practicing it. Being an alchemist and using alchemist supplies allows you to create elixirs. Using a herbalism kit allows you to create drafts. These are separate kind of career paths which the player can get ranks in, but that they can also be applied to NPCs. And then the article, The Well-Stocked Shop, gives examples of the different drafts and elixirs that you could make. So elixir of deafness, or draft of healing, draft of recovery, so on. And you could use those to stock an alchemist shop, or as examples for players who wanted to learn alchemy or herbalism, as examples of things that they can create. These rules are very in-depth, as they are the longest kind of section in the zine. If a group or particular player has a very keen interest in investing character downtime into learning to create drafts or elixirs, then these details of the different capabilities of the different ranks of alchemists and herbalists and how to progress through the ranks would be very useful for a DM. There's a bit of a problem with this article, is that it is quite dense, and the only place in the zine where the kind of conversational tone of the writing, I think, gets in the way a bit of the message of the text. For instance, I'm still not quite sure why potions are the most powerful type of drafts and elixirs that have spell-like effects, when it seems that all the abilities of drafts and elixirs listed in the shop have spell-like effects. For instance, the draft of Universal Antidote, which is essentially the second level spell protection from poison, which is definitely a spell-like effect, but is a draft rather than a potion. Additionally, the separation of low-level potions into drafts and elixirs, created by alchemists and herbalists respectively, seems a bit odd and would appear to be a stylistic choice. I think this is particularly apparent as the highest rank of both schools of training can both create potions again, so the split is only for like the bottom ranks of these career tracks. So I think a character that would be interested in creating potions would likely be proficient with both Alchemist kit and Herbalist kit, and if not, then setting that prerequisite wouldn't be too much of a problem. But if I was to run this, I think I'd combine both schools of training into one career path, requiring proficiency with both sets of tools and maybe doubling the cost of learning each rank. This way the character would be able to use each tool set when making the different types of drafts or elixirs, and then when the rest of your group is asking for you to make healing potion, you don't just have to turn to them and say, oh, I can only make a potion that gives you an advantage on intelligence saving throws, which might not feel very good that you've got an entire half of the different potions that you could potentially make just cut off from you. So I think despite the density of the text, it is, you know, a good system for if someone wants that level of detail. And additionally, the different drafts and elixirs available in the well-stocked shop at the end are really good and varied, and can be definitely used as an inspiration for other potions that your players could make, or just used to stock a shop that they come across in a city. So the downsides in this one article aren't unsurmountable, but I think the rule set from here could definitely be used with tightening up a little bit. And then the final article is Plaguing Your Mages with Arcane Pests. This final article features 4 insect-like creatures that act as magical parasites, infesting old scroll cases, ancient magical tomes, and the dusty shelves of abandoned libraries. They are the earworm, the ice spider, mind mites, and the tongue slug. They're system neutral, so they can be used in any game where creatures like this could exist, and have varying effects from being a kind of reverse babelfish, making languages you understand sound like ones that you don't, to eating memorized spells straight out of a wizard's mind. The way to be cured of these parasites is also equally amusing, with the earworm fleeing from its host if bombarded with 4 or more languages at once, and the tongue slug can be removed by drinking a potion that tastes just as foul to the host as it does to the parasite. And then at the end, there's a section of advice on using these parasites in a game. I think it's really good and really pertinent, advising that you don't overuse them, otherwise your party might become fearful of every bookshelf and every potion bottle they find in the adventures. And I think that less is certainly more when it comes to these creatures. So I like this article quite a lot. I think they're a really good way, it's a really good way to end the zine with a kind of short, snappy article that can be used in every game, and is accompanied by some of the best artwork in the zine. In particularly that piece of the tongue slug there is just horrifying, but really good at the same time. So that's Monty Haul. To round up, I think that the great strength of the zine is in the tone of the writing. As I said before, it's almost conversational at times, and when it's good, it makes the zine an absolute pleasure to read, and explains a lot about the thinking and decisions made in the zine, and offers a sort of designer's commentary that you wouldn't find in an official 5th edition product. But unfortunately, while this makes for good reading, I can see it becoming a bit difficult to reference on the fly during a game, particularly the rules for Alchemy, which are a little dense for my tastes. Apart from that, I think the content of the zine overall is great, particularly like the article on magical cities, the reaction roll, the sorcerer's origin, and the magical parasites, and all of those would equally make their way into my campaigns. Of the 4 of things there that I just listed, I think 2 of them are system neutral and can be used in any game system, and one of them, the reaction roll, is a revamp of old content for 5th edition, so I think I can safely say that this issue succeeds in bringing an old school feel to 5th edition content. Additionally, the art is fantastic and is nicely spaced throughout the zine, with almost every double page spread having a piece of art on it, and white space taken up by these little nice illustrations here. So overall, I'd say that the zine is a great success, and while the writing style might not be appropriate for every article in the zine, it certainly doesn't take away from the places where it does work, and the places where it does work are an absolute pleasure to read. So well done to everyone involved, well done to Mark, and thank you again for sending it to me. That's been Hammer and Dice. Thank you for watching.